Ladies and gentlemen, we came to our sixth session of today, and we have our Dr. John who will talk with us. So, sir, you have the speech. You can continue on.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Faisal. I would like to thank SEMA and all the organizers of this beautiful event. It is a great privilege for me to be in ISAT. Well, my paper is called The Role of Income Distribution in the History of Economic Thought, in the history of economic development theories, and a view from Latin America. And as its title indicates, my aim is to study the role of income distribution within the theories of economic development from 1950s to the present. And I'm taking a Latin American view because it was the region that had the highest level of relative development in relation to the other main regions of the world. And I'm gonna let you know my central hypothesis of the paper. Um, it says that um, if one pays attention and looks carefully at the evolution of economic development theories from the lens of income distribution, one can distinguish two very different stages. The first one goes from the beginning of development theories in the 50s to the early mid 70s. During these years, economic development theory as an independent discipline began to be studied, and the concept of economic development, the meaning, began to be transformed itself and start to evolve, going from being just a simple synonym with the concept of economic growth to gradually incorporating new layers or dimensions. Um, Among the most important dimensions we can point out are the generation of employment, increasing productivity, improving the productive structure, promote technical change, and achieve a more progressive income distribution. Income distribution appears at the end of the period between the 60s and the 70s as a main problem and as a main core of dispute. However, from the 70s on until today, things began to change. The end of the golden age of capitalism due to stagflation provoked the rise of neoliberalism at the hands of various right-wing governments in many countries of the world, Margaret Thatcher in the UK, Ronald Reagan in the US, and in many Latin American countries, it was brought by different military coups all over the region. And this brought about enormous changes and transformations in development theories, and in particular in the role of income distribution in its study. As a result, new economic, social, and political problems arose, and income distribution was completely abandoned as a core element in economic development theories. And since then, income distribution never regained or recovered its position again. So I'm going to begin my presentation with a little of history, starting with economic development as a main topic in economics as a discipline, which began to be studied after World War II. The world was beginning that time to function under the Bretton Woods system, which established in 1944 the rules for commercial and financial relations among core and peripheral countries. And this reconstruction process of the world went hand in hand with the creation of several multinational institutions, the ILO, the ECLAC, the World Bank, the IMF, etc., which were mainly designed to help developing countries to improve its standard of living and achieve economic development. It is also true, as many radical scholars state, that these institutions were also created in some way to promote the virtues of capitalism and discourage third world countries to align and follow the Soviet Union path. During this period, the post-war period, until the beginning of the 70s, which is commonly known as the golden age of capitalism, economic development went from being understood as a mere synonym of economic growth to gradually start to include several dimensions. At first, was economic growth plus the generation of employment. A few years later, then theoretical discussions added the need for transformate the structure, the economic structure of the country. Then the increase in the necessity of achieving authority to the use and development of new technology. And at the end of the 60s, income distributions appear as a main topic in economic development theories. Between the 50s and the 70s, there were basically two main groups of theories. First, the country level theories group, which focus only in the study of specific countries and its problems. And the second group, the more radical group, would use a more systemic approach and study not only each country, but also its relations to the rest of the world. The first group, the one which focused exclusively on the specific and particular situation of each country, it used to explain economic development as a particular problem. As a result, we have theories that state that economic development is like a sort of linear process in which each country goes through successive stages of economic growth, the theory built by Walt Whitman Rostow, or development could be achieved by the country's ability to sustain a process of balanced growth, developed by Ragnar Nursky, unbalanced growth, Hirschman, or if the country is able to apply a big push to its economy and bring the economy to a new different level, which was a theory developed by Rothstein Rodin. Three main elements characterize all these theories. First, the main challenge of development was how to successfully stimulate economic growth, and all theories focus exclusively on this issue, on this problem. Second, there is no conflict of interest among countries. There is no dispute or link or causal relationship between developed and developing countries. And a world with full developed countries could be possible and achieved under all these theories. All the country has to do is apply the correct policies. And finally, income distribution has no particular place in these development theories. These are the first group of theories. The second group, which I call the radical group, had a completely different approach and focus on the subject, and used to explain the root of underdevelopment as essentially a consequence of the functioning of the capitalist system. They look at underdevelopment as a result of specific relationships between developed and developing countries. And from the period that goes from 1950s to 1970s, this second group of theories was essentially composed by the Latin American structuralism and five Marxian theories, many of which were developed prior to 1950s. These Marxian theories were imperialism, dependency theory, unequal exchange, monopoly capital, and world system analysis. I don't have time to enter into each detail of each theory and the way in which they specifically analyze economic development and particularly income distribution. But I'm going to say just a few things of each theory to give you uh, the flavor of it in a certain way. Latin American structuralism was a theory developed and created by Raúl Prebisch, an Argentine scholar, which was appointed director of the ECLAC, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, in 1949 and 1950. He developed two books, two very important books, uh, where he analyzed the main problems of the region of the Latin American countries. And he analyzed development by dividing the world in two main groups, the center and the periphery. The center, he defined it as the group of countries which has control of development and especially of the production of new technology. And the peripheral countries uh, were composed by the rest of the countries which lagged behind in technological terms. The interesting thing about this theory is that both group of countries interact with each other, they trade with each other, and typically what happens is that peripheral countries export uh, primary goods to the center, and the center export manufactured goods to the periphery. So there is a trend in which primary goods had low value added and the manufacturing goods had higher value added. So there is a relationship established due to the trade between the two groups of countries that what makes is they consolidate their positions. The center in the center countries in a position where they control the development process, and the peripheral countries in a subordinate position. So, according to the theory, another important thing was that there is a way out of underdevelopment, which could be um, achieved by the industrialization by import substitution or by export promotion. In Latin America, we typically had the the process of industrialization by import substitution. Uh, and in that sense, the peripheral countries can develop the manufacturing sector and then begin to try to start exporting the, the, the manufactured goods. The other five theories are rooted in the Marxian tradition and were the most radical theories in the region and in the theory of economic development. And uh, they start, the first one is the imperialism theory, which was developed after Marx and had a significant influence in third world countries and later in economic development debates. And was a term, imperialism, coined by a journalist, Hobson, at the beginning of the 20th century in 1902. And the first wave of Marxist theorizing on imperialism as a system of uneven development between nation states occurred in the period leading up to the First World War, a few years before economic development as a discipline start to grow. And imperialism signify on the whole the aggressive expansion of Europe into Africa and Asia, and the division of the world by the great powers and the rise of the imperialist rivalities. The classical theories of imperialism were formulated at the beginning of the 20th century by Hilferdin, Luxemburg, Bukharin, and Lenin. I'm not able to enter into detail of the author that I have in the paper, but let me tell you a few general things of Lenin and Luxemburg ideas, which were very influential here in the region in Latin America. For Lenin, imperialism was an integral part of late capitalism and not a mere policy. And while he saw it as leading inevitably to global conflict, he conceived of capitalism as developing the forces of production everywhere. On the other hand, Rosa Luxemburgo, while more explicitly concerned with the social impact of capitalism on the non-Western countries of society, she saw imperialism as part of a great drive to expansion, which was at the heart of the capitalist system. So while Lenin was eventually to accept the importance and validity of nationalist revolt against imperialism, Luxemburg believed that a break with international capitalism was a prerequisite to achieve development. Uh, the second main theory, second radical theory of this group, is which was developed between the 50s and the 70s, very 20 intense years, is the dependency theory group, which was more a current of thought than a single theory. They comprehend a bunch of authors and scholars who believe some who share some ideas all together, and especially they all agree in criticizing Latin American structuralism. And the key argument was that Latin American countries found themselves in positions of underdevelopment as a consequence of the function of the system. They say to Latin American structuralism, you're explaining a world that it's unfair, where you have two groups of countries, the center and the periphery. And what you state is that you have to place yourself in the winners group. You have to make, uh, you have to go from a peripheral country to a center country. And instead you should try to change the system because it's impossible that all peripheral countries go to the center position. And therefore it's going to consolidate an unfair uh, system in which the center countries exploit the peripheral countries. So the core industrialized countries, according to this theory, were experiencing growth and economic development through the exploitation of the non-industrialized peripheral countries. Okay? Um, the, the, the economic development and underdevelopment stages are not two situations or successive stages of a continuous process, but on the contrary, underdevelopment is a structural situation caused by an unjust and unequal world, which is set up for the benefit of the powerful countries, and the only solution to that is to abandon the capitalist system, try to change it. The third theory, the radical theory, is the monopoly capital, uh, which came from the work of Paul Baran, first in a book called The Political Economy of Growth, published in 1957, and then Monopoly Capital, presented in 1966. He was already dead. He died in 1964, which was written and finished by Paul Suisi, his good colleague. The Marxian monopoly capital school builds on Marx's argument that the scale and the capital intensity of production and the centralization of ownership increases as capitalism develops, and this process leads to a growing monopolization of capital, so that at some point in the late 19th century, monopoly in a way supersedes competition and ushers in a new stage of capitalism. In a world governed by monopolies, competition is no longer the dominant and power. Is no longer dominant and power becomes crucial to explain market prices and profits. Monopolies no longer competes by lowering prices, but just compete by um, other source uh, of strategies, which not includes lowering prices, because they control it and they establish them as a markup, as a margin over prices. The fourth theory, I'm gonna go a little bit. It's an equal exchange. It's uh, which try to explain different forms of exploitation which are hidden in trade. It was a theory developed um, using the main idea of the previous Singer thesis, which is the deterioration of the terms of trade. And the main concept, the main idea was coined in 1962 by a Greco-French economist, Arcade Emmanuel, uh, to denote the exchange of goods and services that take place in a context where the rate of profit has been internationally equalized, but wage share of wage levels have not, and therefore trade hidden an unequal exchange, as the name states. And finally, the last theory is provided by world system analysis. World system analysis is a multidisciplinary theory, macro scale approach to world history and social change, which uh, emphasize the idea of a world system, not a nation state analysis, uh, but a whole world system as the main but not exclusive unit of social analysis. World system, in a way, refers to the interregional and transnational division of labor, which divides the world into core countries, semi-peripheral countries, and peripheral countries. Um, and and these these five theories, they all share in common a few things about income distribution. These five theories and Latin American structuralism. Um, we have on the one hand the situation of the Latin American structuralism, and on the other hand the Marxian theories. Regarding Latin American structuralism, at the beginning, the theory in the 1950s did not focus particularly on income distribution as its main goal, but it focused on in trying to understand the nature of the relationship between center and peripheral countries, and also on how to promote economic growth. But as years were passing and these theories were debating with other theories, were discussing with other scholars from other theories, the debates were gradually starting to include different dimensions: employment generation, transformation in the productive structure, how to go further and deepen the process of industrialization by substitution, which should be the role of the state, and how to make good plans and programs more efficiently, which was the role of technical change in the whole this process. And eventually, since mid-60s, started to incorporate increasing discussions on income distribution. So at the beginning, they were just economic growth, but at the end was they were discussing income distribution and its main problem. On the other hand, for the Marxian theories, income distribution was always at the core of the analysis. Uh, in a book, in a very famous quote, Robert H. Bernard used to say that profit is like the lifeblood of capitalism. Is the raison d'être, of individual capital, as well as the direct measure of their prowess. So the problem of distribution between capital and workers for these theories was always at the core of the analysis. And it is important to note that this process of gradual transformation of the study of economic development was also fueled by massive mobilizations, strikes, and radicalization of the working class everywhere. Between 1950s and 1970s, there were many events very important. Just to mention a few, we had the Cuban Revolution in 1959, the massive mobilization against Vietnam War, which lasted until 1975, all the civil rights movement in the US, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, which were both assassinated in 1965 and 1968, the protest of May 1968 in France and all around the world, etc. And in Latin America, was one of the most radicalized regions of the world. The left movements here in most of our countries converge with a very combative working class, with also the movement of priests of the third world with the church, and the emergence of revolutionary groups that wanted to change the system, which was also in line with many of the ideas of the scholars of the radical theories I just pointed out. Um, so, as a result of all these phenomena, disputes over income distribution in the region were at the top of the priorities of the working class. And it was very interesting and important. Uh, However, at the beginning of the 70s, the war began to change. The stagflation of the 70s provoked a profound crisis, which ended up uh, with a strong political shift and the eventually rise of neoliberalism and the subsequent decline of Keynesianism, who lost its position of predominance in the world. And as a result of all this, the state lost its place over the development process and was replaced by the loss of the market, of the free market, of the law of supply and demand and perfect competition. And all this process was reinforced by political changes carried out both in developed countries and in developed and in developing countries. In Latin America, all these transformations was carried out by military coups. We were backed by the US and international organizations such as the IMF, World Bank, etc. As a result, in Latin America, we abandoned the import substitution industrialization strategy, and financial dominance began to rule. The return of democracy during the 80s did not alter this new path of development, which was established by the military coups, the dictatorship. But on the contrary, this process was even go deepen uh, until the end of the 20th century. Uh, the economic and social consequence of all this process of the rise of neoliberalism were devastating for the countries and for the theories of economic development. I can point out a few things. First, most radical theories of development were completely abandoned. The entire attack by the military government was centered on them. And to give you just an example, for instance, the Argentinian working class was the most combative and organized working class in the region. And in 1965, their demands were to get a fair share of distribution, get the 50% share. They already had 48%, but they want 50. And after only 1 year of dictatorship, in 1975, the working class lost 20 percentage points. So the distribution went from 48 to 25% and never recovered again. It was terrible. Second, all the theoretical discussions on development were drastically modified and abandoned most of their main axes. Discussions regarding economic growth, employment, productive transformation, improvements in income distribution left their place in a way and were replaced by foreign debt discussions, how to avoid internal and external imbalances, maintain free interest rates and exchange rates, uh, eliminate all trade barriers, etc. And finally, new theories emerge to replace old ones. Approaches based on center peripheral relations, imperialism, dependency theory, or unequal exchange were replaced by globalization, where the different hierarchies and positions of countries within capitalism were eliminated. In sum, we can derive a very few important lessons for the future. Um, First, the period that goes from the 50 to the 70 involves a step forward where numerous radical theories emerge that not only incorporated systemic analysis with different hierarchies between countries, but are gradually putting income distribution at the core of the discussions. However, the rise of neoliberalism throughout the world, which in the case of Latin America was through the arrival of military dictatorship, imposed models of financial hegemony that uh, produce important changes and the abandonment of the distributive problem as one of the main axes of development theories. Radical theories became marginal, and the new approaches emphasize globalization and a globalized world. So we need to recover the central idea that development and underdevelopment are inseparably linked as two sides of the same process, that the world has hierarchies, histories, and not all countries have the same possibilities to achieve economic development. We also need to retransform the way we think about development. We need to put back into the place the role of income distribution as a central variable of dispute between capital and labor. The practically total abandonment of the theoretical debates on income distribution, as well as the relegation of some radical theories, uh, I think is one of the great victories of neoliberalism, and it's time for us to revert. Thank you.
Well, thank you, sir, for this good presentation and good knowledge that you have shared with us. Really, like we are finishing at this time, and then like I checked the YouTube channel as we didn't get any question for right now. On behalf of the committee, our committee, and on behalf of Sema, Dr. Sema, I would like to thank you because she got a little bit technical problem, so that's why like she sent to me a message, and she would like to thank you once more, and we'll keep on touch, sir. Thank you for
Okay,
the presentation.
thank you very much for that.